You're not blood in this house. Have some dignity and leave my father's legacy alone. That was how it began. Not as a misunderstanding, not as a quiet conversation behind closed doors, but as a sentence thrown at me like a verdict, spoken loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. I want you to understand the problem clearly from the start, because what happened to me that evening was not an argument. It was an erasure. My name is Nora Walker. I'm 52 years old, a retired school teacher, and for the past 22 years, I have been the wife of Richard Walker, a man I once believed I would grow old with in peace and dignity. The house we lived in, a beautiful 3-story colonial in Savannah, Georgia, belonged to my family long before it belonged to him. It was my grandmother's home, my mother's home, then mine. I handed him the keys on our wedding day, not the other way around. But none of that mattered when Sasha, his daughter from an affair he had long before we were married, the child I had agreed to accept into my life because I believed forgiveness was the price of keeping a family together, walked into that house after the memorial for his mother and looked at me like I was some old maid who had overstayed her welcome. And Richard, the man I had built a home with, just stood there and let her. Sasha stood across from me, young, polished, furious that I had said no. I had refused to leave the house. That's not your decision, I told her quietly. This is my home too. That was when her face changed. The civility dropped away, and what remained was something sharp and ugly. You think you have rights here? She spat. You're just the woman my father married. You're nothing without him. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. No one stepped in. I told her again, calmly, that I wasn't going anywhere, that this house had been entrusted to me long before she decided to claim it. That respect went both ways. She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Then she reached for the vase. It happened faster than my mind could catch up. One moment it was sitting on the side table, filled with white lilies I had arranged that morning. The next, it was airborne. The vase struck my shoulder and shattered against my chest. I felt a sharp, searing pain as glass cut into my skin. Warm blood soaked through the front of my blouse. Someone screamed. I staggered back, stunned more than anything, staring down at myself as if this were happening to someone else. Sasha didn't look frightened. She looked satisfied. "Get out," she said again. "Before I make you." I looked at Richard then. My husband. The man who had promised me protection, partnership, loyalty. He didn't rush to me. He didn't check if I was bleeding. He didn't raise his voice at his daughter. Instead, he sighed, tired, irritated, and said, "Nora, stop making this harder than it needs to be. Stop making it harder." As if I had thrown the vase. As if I had drawn blood. As if my pain was an inconvenience. In that moment, something broke inside me that had been cracked for a very long time. Because this wasn't the first time I had swallowed humiliation for the sake of this family. Years ago, when I discovered Richard's affair, I thought my world had ended. I remember sitting alone in our bedroom, holding the phone, reading messages that confirmed everything my intuition had been screaming. I remember the weight in my chest when he confessed not just to the betrayal, but to the child that came from it. "Sasha," he cried. He begged. He told me it meant nothing. He told me I was his real life, his real home. He promised it would never happen again. And I stayed. I stayed because I believed in marriage. Because I believed forgiveness was strength. Because I thought holding the family together mattered more than my pride. I welcomed his child into my life. I paid for school supplies. I attended birthdays. I bit my tongue when I was reminded, again and again, that I was the woman who had chosen to forgive, not the woman who had been chosen. And now here I was, bleeding in my own living room, being told I had no blood claim to a house that held my entire adult life. I pressed a napkin to my shoulder. No one offered help. Sasha had already turned away, as if I were no longer worth her attention. Richard finally spoke again. "Maybe you should take a few days. Let things cool down." A few days. Like I was a guest. Like I was temporary. Like I hadn't given decades to this place. I didn't argue anymore. I nodded, because I knew then that words would not save me. Only truth would. I went upstairs and packed a bag. I moved slowly, carefully, each step a reminder of the sting in my shoulder and the ache in my chest. I passed the photographs on the wall, holidays, anniversaries, moments I thought meant something. When I came back down, Sasha was sitting in my father's rocking chair. the one thing in that room that had nothing to do with Richard. She sat in it like she owned it, scrolling through her phone, blood from my wound still drying on the floor nearby. No one stopped me as I walked out. The night air was cool against my skin. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From realization. I tell you this directly, plainly, because I don't want you distracted by side stories or excuses. My husband allowed his daughter, the product of his betrayal, to humiliate me, injure me, and expel me from my own home. They wanted me gone. They wanted the house. They thought forgiveness meant weakness. They were wrong, and this is the story of how I took my dignity back. If you felt Nora's pain and strength, hit like and drop a comment with your city. Someone near you might be watching too. The wind hit me the moment I stepped outside. I hadn't even grabbed a real coat, just a light cardigan and my overnight bag. I didn't think I'd actually need it. I didn't think I'd be walking out of my own house bleeding, shivering, and invisible. The porch light stayed on behind me, casting a pale glow over the front lawn. I looked back once. Just once. Through the curtains, I saw shadows moving inside Sasha, laughing with someone, her glass lifted in a mock toast. I was gone, and no one missed me. I drove without music. Just the sound of tires on wet asphalt and the thump of my heartbeat in my ears. The streets of Savannah passed in a blur of dim storefronts and moss-draped oaks. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with each passing mile. My shoulder throbbed where the glass had cut, but I didn't stop to look. Pain was familiar. Pain was manageable. I didn't want to go to a hotel. I didn't want to explain why I looked like I'd just walked away from a war. So I turned east, toward Brunswick, toward the only place left that had ever felt safe. Mama's house had stood empty since she passed 5 years ago. I hadn't sold it, couldn't bring myself to. It was a modest place, just a small wood frame home with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked like it had something to say. I parked under the oak tree, the same one I used to climb as a child when life felt too big. The key was still hidden under the stone frog by the door, just where Mama used to keep it. My fingers trembled as I turned the lock. The scent of cedar and dust greeted me, and beneath that, the faintest trace of her perfume, lilac and rosewater. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. For the first time in hours, I let my body feel what it had been holding back. Exhaustion, grief, humiliation, all tangled together like a knot behind my ribs. I walked through the house in silence, running my fingers along the old furniture, the faded photographs, the worn Bible on the mantel. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want the noise. I just sat in the old floral armchair by the fireplace and remembered. I remembered the first time I caught Richard lying. It was subtle, almost elegant in its cruelty. A late meeting here, a missed call there, the smell of a different soap on his collar. And then, one night, the truth spilled out over tears and apologies and the promise of never again. I remember curling up on this very chair, clutching the phone, trying to breathe through the betrayal. But I stayed. I stayed for love, for family, for pride. I believed in the promise of redemption. I believed people could change. I didn't believe anymore. It was just past 11 when I pulled out my phone. I stared at it for a long time before I scrolled through my contacts and found his name, Frank Denton. Frank had been Richard's best man at our wedding, but he'd always been my friend first. A good man, a good lawyer. Retired now, last I heard. We hadn't spoken in years. But I knew if anyone would tell me the truth, if anyone would see me, it would be Frank. The phone rang twice before I lost my nerve and hung up. Then, 5 minutes later, it rang. I picked up with a shaky breath. "Hello? Nora?" His voice was older now, raspier, but still kind, still frank. "Is everything all right?" I couldn't answer. My throat closed up. "Nora?" he asked again, gentler this time. I swallowed. "Frank, I need your help." He didn't ask why. Not yet. He just said, "Tell me where you are. I'll be there in the morning." That was the first time I cried that night. Not when they threw me out. Not when the glass broke against my skin. Not when my husband chose silence over me. But when someone finally said, "I'll come to you." I hung up the phone and sat back in Mama's chair. My shoulder ached. My pride ached more. I looked around at the old wallpaper, the fading photos, the memories that filled every corner. And for the first time in a long time, I said out loud, just to the air, to God, to whoever was still listening, they won't get away with it. They could take the house, they could smear my name, but I wasn't going to disappear. Not quietly. Not this time. The knock came just after sunrise. A soft, respectful knock, not the kind that demands to be answered, but the kind that waits patiently for you to find the strength to open the door. I wrapped a blanket tighter around my shoulders as I walked to the front of Mama's house. My shoulders still throbbed beneath the gauze I'd taped down myself, but the bleeding had stopped sometime in the night. The pain had dulled to something bearable. What hadn't dulled was the ache in my chest. I opened the door, and there he was. Frank Denton, in an old wool coat and a Braves cap, holding a paper bag and a thermos. "You look like hell," he said, but his voice was soft, not cruel, just honest. "I feel worse," I replied. He handed me the bag still warm. "Egg sandwiches from Mel's Diner, and coffee. Thought you might need something in your stomach before you tell me what happened." I stepped aside and let him in. Frank had always been like that, direct, practical, with a good heart tucked beneath a layer of dry sarcasm. He didn't pry as I shuffled back into the living room, or as I sat back in Mama's armchair, clutching the hot coffee like it could anchor me. He sat across from me, in the old rocker, and waited. I started talking. I told him everything from the moment Sasha threw the vase, to Richard standing there silent, to the way I packed my things and left the house I'd spent more than 2 decades building. I told him about the years of forgiveness, the affair, the child, the second chance I'd offered that was now being used to erase me completely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look shocked. He just listened. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Nora, do you know whose name is actually on the deed to the house?" My stomach twisted. "I thought it was both of ours," I said quietly. "We never talked much about it after his mother passed. She gave us the house as a gift, not through lawyers, just a key and a prayer. But we made renovations, took out a home equity loan. I signed papers, but I don't remember the details. It was all so long ago." Frank set down his cup. "That's the first place we look," he said. "Because I've seen things like this before. A spouse, especially one with more financial control, slowly shifts assets over time, not always with full consent, not always legally. If your name isn't on that deed, Nora, or if you signed something you didn't understand, they may think they've got you." "I didn't sign anything," I said, then hesitated. "At least, not recently, and certainly not anything to give up ownership." Frank nodded slowly. "That's good. But we need to find out exactly what's been done behind your back, and we'll need paperwork, the original title, any refinance documents, tax records, and anything else with your name or signature on it." I looked around the room, the way one does when they realize their past might be slipping through their fingers. "I don't have anything here," I said. "It's all back at the house, and I doubt Sasha will let me near a single drawer." Frank gave me a steady look. "Then we do it the old-fashioned way. We go to the county clerk's office, pull up every record tied to that property. If there's fraud, forged signatures, misused authority, we'll find it. And if Richard tried to claim that house for himself, without you knowing, it'll be in black and white." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't come with promises or tears. It came with 2 egg sandwiches, a cup of coffee, and a man willing to believe me when no one else did. "I don't have money for lawyers, Frank," I said, almost ashamed. "I didn't come here as a lawyer," he replied. "I came here as your friend, and someone who can still read fine print better than most men half my age." I smiled, the first real smile in what felt like weeks. "I want to fight back," I said quietly. "Not for the house, for my name, for my place." And quote, he leaned forward, eyes steady. "Then that's what we'll do." That afternoon, Frank and I drove to the county clerk's office together. The building sat low and square on a quiet street, beige brick faded by decades of sun and storms. It was the kind of place most people only visited when they were born, married, or buried. Or when something had gone terribly wrong. The ride there was quiet, not awkward, just heavy. Frank drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I watched the scenery slide past the window. Gas stations, pawn shops, a beauty salon advertising senior discounts on Tuesdays. Life going on, indifferent to the fact that mine had cracked wide open. Inside the building, the air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A woman behind the counter looked up at us with practiced politeness. "How can I help you?" Frank spoke calmly, professionally. "We'd like to pull the full property record for 418 Magnolia Drive." The clerk typed, clicked, nodded. "Owner name?" I swallowed. "Nora Walker." She paused, frowned slightly, then kept typing. "And Richard Walker," she added. That pause, that half-second of hesitation landed in my stomach like a stone. The printer behind her whirred to life. She slid a thick stack of papers across the counter. "These are the public records, deed history, liens, and recent filings." It's, Frank thanked her and led me to a small table near the wall. He laid the papers out carefully, methodically, the way a man does when he already suspects what he's about to find. I watched his eyes move across the documents. Once, twice. Then his jaw tightened. "Nora," he said quietly, "when was the last time you signed anything related to the house?" I thought back. "About 2 years ago, maybe?" Richard said it was paperwork for refinancing the kitchen remodel, lower interest rate. "Nothing about ownership." Frank nodded. "That's what I thought." He turned one document toward me. "This is a quitclaim deed." The words blurred for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means someone transferred their interest in the property," he said gently. "It's often used between family members. Simple, fast, dangerous if abused." My heart started to pound. Transferred to who? He didn't answer right away. He slid the page closer. Richard Walker, sole owner. The room felt suddenly too small, too bright. I pressed my hand against the table to steady myself. "That's not possible," I said. "I never agreed to that. I would never give up that house. Never." Frank tapped the bottom of the page. "There's a signature here attributed to you." I stared at it. The looping letters, the familiar shape of my name. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. The slant was wrong. The pressure uneven. The flourish at the end of my last name, something I had never done. "I didn't sign this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Frank replied, "and that's the problem. Someone signed for you." My mind raced. Richard, Sasha, or both. The pieces began to slide into place, ugly and undeniable. "They planned this," I said slowly. "This didn't start last night. They've been setting this up for years." Frank nodded. "And now they think it's finished." I felt a wave of nausea. Memories flooded back, moments I had dismissed, excused, explained away. Richard insisting on handling paperwork. Sasha suddenly taking an interest in property values. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. "How long ago was this filed?" I asked. Frank checked the date. 8 months. 8 months. I thought of how carefully Sasha had chosen her words the night she threw the vase, how confidently she told me to leave. Not like someone making a demand, like someone enforcing a decision already made. "They didn't expect me to fight back," I said. "No," Frank replied. "They expected you to fold, to be embarrassed, to disappear quietly." We gathered the documents and walked out into the late afternoon sun. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. On the drive back to Mama's house, I finally allowed myself to feel the anger, not the explosive kind, but the cold, focused kind, the kind that sharpens instead of blinding. "I want to confront him," I said suddenly. "I want to hear him explain this." Frank shook his head. "Not yet. Right now he still thinks you're confused and emotional. Let him believe that. We document everything first, then we act." I exhaled slowly. He was right. As much as I wanted answers, what I needed was proof. When we reached the house, Frank helped me organize the copies into a folder. He wrote notes in the margins, circled dates, underlined names. "This is bigger than a family dispute," he said. "This is fraud, and if they used your signature once, they may have done it more than once." The words hung in the air. That night, after Frank left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I ran my fingers over the folder, feeling the weight of the truth inside it. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who believed love meant endurance, who thought silence kept the peace, who forgave because she was afraid of being alone. That woman was gone. In her place was someone quieter, stronger, someone who finally understood that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you protect, even when it costs you everything. I hadn't planned to see him so soon. But the night before, as I lay awake on Mama's old sofa, the silence pressing down on me like a weight, I realized something. If I wanted to understand how far this betrayal went, how deep the roots of it truly ran, I had to look him in the eye. I had to let him speak. And listen closely. That morning, I dressed simply. Dark jeans, a soft blue blouse, a beige scarf to hide the bandage on my shoulder. I combed my hair and put on a little lipstick, not out of vanity but because I needed to look composed, collected, like a woman who hadn't just been discarded like a broken chair on the curb. Before I left, I slipped my phone into my purse and opened the voice recorder app. I wasn't sure what I'd get, but I wanted the truth. And truth, I had learned, doesn't always come in neat little confessions. It hides in tone, in silence, in choice of words. He answered the door with that same easy smile he always wore when he wanted something charm-masking calculation. "Nora," he said, almost surprised, "wasn't expecting you." I forced a smile. "I thought we should talk." He stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. Of course. You want coffee? I just made a fresh pot." The house looked exactly as I had left it. The flowers had been removed, the table cleared, the floor mopped. No trace of blood, no trace of me. Sasha's shoes were by the stairs, her purse on the hall table. "I won't stay long," I said, setting my purse down careful to keep the mic facing upward. We sat in the sunroom. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows over the woven rug I had picked out in Charleston years ago. Richard poured himself a cup of coffee. None for me. "So," he said, leaning back, casual, "you look better than I expected. I thought you'd be more shaken." I tilted my head. "Should I be?" He chuckled. No, well, you left pretty upset." I looked him straight in the eye. "You let her throw a vase at me, Richard." His smile faltered, just a flicker. It was a tense moment. She was emotional. "You were pushing her." "She assaulted me." He raised a hand, palm out. "Let's not start pointing fingers. We're all adults here. Things were said. Things happened. It's over now." That word overlit something behind my ribs. "I just need to know where we stand," I said softly. "Is this house? Are you saying it's not mine anymore?" He sipped his coffee, slow and deliberate. "Nora," he said, "I'm not trying to hurt you, but we both know things have changed. You've always had a good heart, but legally, it's complicated." I stared at him, silent. "You've been through a lot," he continued, "and I didn't want to put more stress on you. That's why I didn't bring it up when the papers were filed." Asked Pada. "What papers?" He hesitated barely. "The refinancing, the adjustments. It was necessary to protect the house." "To protect it from what?" I asked. He smiled again. "You know how it is. Debts, taxes, market fluctuations. I did what I had to do. It was just easier this way." "Easier for who?" He didn't answer. And in that silence, I found confirmation. Richard had convinced himself this was logical, that his betrayal was strategy, that replacing me with Sasha, rewriting history, erasing my name was practical. He thought I would go quietly. I stood, slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." He looked surprised. "That's it?" I nodded. "That's it. I just needed to know." As I turned to leave, he said, "You're not the enemy, Nora. This doesn't have to get ugly." I paused at the doorway. "It already did, Richard. You just didn't notice." He stirred now. I walked out with my head high, my hands steady, and a recording tucked safely in my phone, a man confident in his theft, casual in his cruelty. I wasn't done. Not even close. I sent the audio file to Frank as soon as I got back to Mama's house. No explanation, no extra words, just the clip. He'd understand. He always did. I stood in the kitchen while the water boiled for tea, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass was wild now, yellowing at the edges. Mama used to keep it tidy, used to fuss over the hydrangeas along the fence. I remembered her voice steady, no nonsense, warning me once. If a man can lie with a smile, he can steal with one too. She had been talking about her father, I hadn't realized she'd also been warning me about my husband. The kettle whistled. I poured the water, added a slice of lemon, and tried to breathe, but my mind was racing. If Richard had forged my signature once, he could have done it again. And if he'd used that forged quitclaim deed to claim sole ownership of the house, what else had he done with it? The words from our meeting kept echoing. It was necessary to protect the house. He had sounded almost proud, like he'd outsmarted me. But it wasn't just the property anymore. It was me. I opened my laptop and began searching. Public property records, tax filings, lien databases, anything I could access without triggering a red flag. Most of it was dry legal text, numbers and codes, but my gut kept pulling me forward. Then I remembered someone, a woman named Leah. She used to work with Richard back when he was a branch manager at First Savannah Bank. I had met her once at a company Christmas party 10 or 15 years ago. Sharp, polite, a little guarded, but kind. I searched her name, found her LinkedIn. She was now a regional mortgage consultant in Atlanta. I hesitated, then clicked message. Hi, Leah. I'm not sure if you remember me, Nora Walker. I was hoping I could ask you something privately about Richard. It's regarding a mortgage matter. I'd be deeply grateful if we could speak, even briefly. I didn't expect a reply that day, but 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice hadn't changed. Mrs. Walker, Nora, I do remember you. Of course. What's going on? I stepped into the den and shut the door behind me. I'll be honest, I said. I need to know if Richard ever refinanced our house without my full consent, or if anything was done using my name but without me present. She paused. I heard her breath. Nora, do you know how much was borrowed? I blinked. What do you mean? I left that branch 5 years ago, she said carefully. But before I did, I saw your file come across my desk for review. Richard had applied for a secondary mortgage. There was a lot of pressure to approve it quickly. It's now maced. Secondary mortgage? I never signed for anything like that, I whispered. I figured, she said. But your name was on the documents. It wasn't just listed, you were marked as the co-signer, the guarantor. That's why it stood out to me. I remembered you were a teacher, and the amount was, well, substantial. How much? Another pause. $380,000. I sat down hard on the couch. He used my name to back a loan? I asked, voice trembling. What was the collateral? She didn't answer right away. I'm sorry, Nora. It was the house. The room spun. My fingers gripped the edge of the cushion to keep from slipping. Do you still have access to those documents? I asked. I might, she said, but I'd have to check an old drive. I kept copies of anything that seemed off for my own protection. Could you send them to me? If I can find them, yes. But please understand, if they were falsified, I can't say so officially. You'll need a legal path. I already have one, I said. Just help me find the pieces. We hung up. I sat there for a long time, hands shaking, tea gone cold on the table. It was worse than I thought. He hadn't just taken my name off the deed. He had put it on a loan. Without my knowledge, used my credit, my identity, my life. He was preparing to throw me out while putting me in debt. He was trying to ruin me. But now I had two things he didn't count on: proof and rage. The email came in just before noon. I hadn't even touched my toast. My appetite had vanished sometime last week, somewhere between Sasha's voice and the sound of a vase breaking. But my pulse quickened when I saw Leah's name in my inbox. Subject: Documents as discussed. Attachments: 3 PDF. There were no flowery greetings, just facts. Nora, these are copies of the original mortgage application, the co-signer agreement, and the notarized loan consent. If you look at page 3 of the agreement, you'll see the signature line in question. I hope this helps. Leah. I opened the first document. My eyes scanned the numbers, the terms, the name Walker, Nora J., printed in bold. And then I saw it. The signature. Or rather, a signature, the same mimicry I'd seen on the quitclaim deed. It looked like mine at a glance, but the moment you paid attention, the truth leaked out of the curves. The W too wide, the R too short. A flourish on the A I never used. I forwarded the documents to Frank immediately with one line. They forged it again. Can we move forward? He called within minutes. It's clear, he said, his tone more clipped than usual. Forgery. On two separate legal documents. That's not a civil matter anymore. That's criminal. Then what do we do? I asked. We report it. First to the authorities, start with the sheriff's office. Then we file an injunction to freeze any further activity tied to that property or loan. But before we do anything, I want you to sign an affidavit stating you never authorized these documents. I'll draft it today. I nodded, gripping the phone. Frank, this could get ugly. It already is, Nora. But now? Now it's your turn. He came by late that afternoon. I signed the affidavit at Mama's kitchen table with his silver pen, the same pen he'd used to sign our wedding license as a witness more than 2 decades ago. Funny, isn't it? I said, handing the document back. Same pen. Different kind of promise. Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's make sure this one sticks. With the affidavit signed and the documents ready, I finally felt like I had a weapon in my hand. Not a knife, not a gun, but something more powerful. Paper. Truth. That night, as the house quieted and the Georgia sky turned to deep violet outside, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out an old leather-bound journal, the one Mama had given me for my 40th birthday. I had filled the first 20 pages back then with recipes and memories. After that, life got too busy. Or too quiet. Or maybe I had just forgotten the value of writing things down. But now, I needed it. I wrote at the top of a fresh page, Day 1, the reckoning begins. Then, in careful script, I wrote everything I knew so far, every date, every forged paper, every silence that had meant betrayal. I didn't write with rage. I wrote with precision, like a record keeper in a war no one else wanted to name. This journal, I realized, would become more than just therapy. It would be a testimony, for court perhaps, for me certainly, for the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet too long. I closed the journal and placed it under my pillow, like a talisman. As I turned off the light, I remembered something Richard once said to me on our 5th anniversary. We were sitting on the porch swing, wine in hand, the future still soft and bright. You're the glue in this house, Nora, the one who keeps it all together. Now he wanted me out of it. He'd see soon enough. Glue can harden. The sheriff's office smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. A quiet hum filled the space printers, muffled voices, the low rumble of lives unraveling and restitching inside these walls every day. But for me, this wasn't just paperwork. This was war. Frank and I sat side by side in front of a desk where a tall, balding deputy flipped through the folder we'd prepared. He didn't rush. He read every page twice, lips pressed into a flat line. "You're certain this signature isn't yours?" he asked without looking up. "I'm certain," I said. My voice didn't waver. He nodded, turned to the second document, and circled something with his pen. "These filings were notarized. That'll be key. If we can prove the notary wasn't present during signing or was complicit, you've got a solid fraud case." Frank leaned in. "The notary on file died last year." That made the deputy pause. "Died?" "Stroke," Frank said. I checked. "Why internus?" The deputy closed the folder. "Then we'll need to contact her estate for logbooks, but this strengthens your case. We'll open an investigation. You'll likely be contacted by a detective in the next few days. Meanwhile, I recommend speaking with a civil judge to file a temporary restraining order on the property. That'll freeze any actions Richard might try to take: refinance, sale, eviction." I exhaled. Slowly. "Thank you," I said. "That's all I wanted. For now." End quote. Back in the parking lot, I stood beside Frank's truck, the wind tugging at my scarf. "You did good," he said. "It doesn't feel good." "It will." He paused, then added, "It's going to get louder, though. They won't go down quietly." He was right. I didn't even make it back to Mama's before the noise began. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat as I drove. Message after message. I didn't recognize most of the numbers. When I stopped at a red light, I saw why. Sasha had posted. On Facebook, on Instagram, and on a local community board with 12,000 members. A long, slick statement heavy with faux grief and twisted truths. It breaks my heart to see our family torn apart after Dad's passing. We tried everything to support Nora during this time, but her behavior has become unstable. She's accusing us of stealing even as we grieve. Please respect our privacy. This is a hard time for us all. Attached was a photo of her and Richard smiling in front of the house. My house. The comment section was split. Some offered sympathy, others asked questions. A few defended me, women I hadn't seen in years chiming in. Nora was always good to her, and that doesn't sound like the Nora I knew. But mostly, it stung. It wasn't just the lies. It was how easily they spread. I pulled over on the side of the road, hands clenched around the steering wheel. Frank had warned me. And now the battle wasn't just legal, it was personal, public. I opened my journal that night and titled the new page. Day 2. The smear. I wrote down everything Sasha had posted, every word, every twisted phrase. I saved screenshots, names of people who liked and shared. It wasn't spite. It was record-keeping. Because when you're a woman accused of losing her mind, sometimes you need hard evidence to prove you haven't. Afterward, I sat on the back porch, listening to the night birds. I thought about silence, how long I'd lived with it, obeyed it, let it shape me. And I realized something. They weren't afraid of my voice. They were afraid of my story. Because once it was out there, it couldn't be unseen. Frank called me early that morning, his voice unusually clipped. "I found someone," he said. "A former CPA who worked with Richard during the loan restructuring. She's willing to talk." I didn't need more than that. We drove to a quiet street just outside downtown Savannah. The office was tucked between a bakery and an old photography studio, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. But behind the door was someone who'd seen everything in ink and numbers. Her name was Mrs. Rowan, and she was in her 60s, thin-framed glasses perched on the edge of her nose, every inch the no-nonsense accountant. "I'm not interested in gossip," she said, eyes flicking between us. "But I do believe in facts, and I keep good records." She opened a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder labeled Walker Trust, 2021, and laid it flat on the table. I felt my breath hitch. She tapped the second page with her pen. This was part of the disclosure package Richard provided for the second mortgage application. As you can see, he filed as sole owner, divorced. Frank's brows furrowed. "Divorced?" "That's what raised my antenna," she said. "Because I remembered seeing Nora at a holiday function the previous year. She introduced herself as Richard's wife. So when I saw divorced on a legal disclosure, it struck me as odd." I leaned forward. "Did you ask him about it?" "I did," she replied. "He said the divorce had been finalized privately and that he didn't want to talk about it because it was still painful," she added dryly. He was very good at sounding sincere. Frank turned to me. "If he filed as a divorced sole owner, that means he concealed joint marital assets. That's serious." "He also signed an affidavit stating no other party had legal claim to the property," Rowan added. "If you're still legally married and he used those claims to secure the loan, that's fraud layered on fraud." I swallowed hard. "Would you be willing to testify to that, if it comes to court?" Mrs. Rowan didn't flinch. "Yes, but only because I believe what he did was wrong, and because too many men like him walk away with everything." I nodded, gripping the edge of the table. "Thank you." On the drive home, I stared out the window, the Spanish moss dancing along the road like tired curtains. The facts were starting to gather like a storm. He lied on paper. He forged my name. He erased our marriage. And now? Now, the truth had faces, names, documents, witnesses. But something else was stirring in me, something I hadn't expected. Grief, for what I had believed in. For the man I once thought would protect me. For the woman I used to be gentle, trusting, always assuming that good intentions could be enough. That night, I sat with my journal again. Day 3. Ghosts in the Ledger. I wrote about Mrs. Rowan, about how clean her office smelled, and how steady her voice was when she said, "He was very good at sounding sincere." And I wrote this: "What I miss the most isn't the house. It's the feeling that someone was on my side. Turns out that someone was always me." Frank and I had just returned from another long morning at the courthouse when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Nora?" The voice on the other end was soft, raspy, aged, but familiar. "Mildred?" I sat up straight, surprised. Mildred Stokes had lived 2 doors down from us on Magnolia Drive for nearly 20 years. She was the one who brought over lemon pound cake when I first moved in, the one who helped me find the best shade of white paint for the shutters. She had moved away a few years ago to live with her daughter in North Carolina, but we still exchanged Christmas cards. "I heard something," she said. "Something I thought you should know." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What is it?" "I was on a call with Darlene, you remember her, from the neighborhood committee?" "Well," she said, "Sasha's been meeting with a realtor, talking about staging the house, selling it." A cold sweat broke across my back. "They can't sell it," I said. "It's under investigation. The title is still in dispute." "Well, honey," Mildred said gently, "they're acting like it's already theirs." After I hung up, I called Frank immediately. "They're trying to sell it," I said without greeting. "I'll file the injunction today," he replied. "We'll request an emergency freeze, make sure nothing changes hands until the investigation is complete." By noon, we were back at the courthouse, standing in a hallway lined with peeling paint and vending machines. Frank filed the paperwork with quiet efficiency. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "They're getting nervous," he said as we left. "Desperate people make mistakes. Let them." We stepped into the bright Georgia afternoon. The heat hit us like a curtain, thick and relentless. As Frank walked ahead to call the clerk's office for confirmation, I waited near the courthouse steps, fanning myself with a folder. That's when I saw her. Mrs. Eloise, one of the oldest members of our old church congregation. White curls, pressed blouse, pearls that had likely seen more weddings than most photographers. She was walking slowly, leaning on a cane, but when she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Nora Walker," she said, reaching out. I smiled, surprised. "Mrs. Eloise, it's been so long." She squeezed my hand. "I heard about all this mess. Didn't want to pry, but I know how small this town can be." I nodded. "It's been a lot." She studied my face for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Don't let them write your story for you, child." I blinked. She went on, her voice firm despite the rasp. "People will twist things, make you the bitter wife, the crazy woman, the one who couldn't let go. But I remember who you were when you moved into that house. Strong, decent. You loved that man more than he deserved." My throat tightened. "They can steal a deed, Nora," she said, tapping her cane once. "But they can't steal your truth, not unless you let them." Frank returned then, waving a paper. "Judge approved the hold. No sale." "Not without your signature." Mrs. Eloise gave me one more pat on the arm. "You keep fighting, baby girl. Some of us are still watching." As she walked away, I stood there on those old courthouse steps, the sun pouring down like judgment, and I realized something. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. That night, in my journal, Day 4, the old guard, I wrote about Mrs. Eloise, about Mildred, about how sometimes strength doesn't come from lawyers or documents, it comes from the women who've survived worse and still wear pearls. And I wrote, "They wanted me erased. Instead, I've become the one writing the record." Mama's attic had always been a mess of boxes and mothballs, a space where time went to sleep in cardboard. But that afternoon, I climbed up the old creaking ladder with a mission. I was looking for anything that could tie Richard and me to that house. Tax receipts, bank statements, family photos with dates proof that I was there, that I had been there for decades, not just as a visitor, but as a wife, a partner, a rightful co-owner. Dust clung to my sleeves as I opened each box, sorting through layers of memory, wedding invitations, baby shoes, old recipes in Mama's handwriting. And then, beneath a stack of manila folders labeled 1,998 taxes, I found something unexpected. A wooden jewelry box. Not mine. I had never seen it before. It wasn't locked, just dusty, heavy, and oddly familiar. Inside, among tarnished earrings and an old photo strip of Richard and me from a fair, was an envelope, yellowed, curled at the edges, sealed, but not tightly. My name was on the front, Nora, in Richard's handwriting. My chest tightened. I opened it. The paper inside was lined, written in blue ink. The date at the top, the 16th of March, 2002, a few weeks after our 5th anniversary, just after the first affair. I read, slowly, every word. "Nora, if you're reading this, I probably chickened out of giving it to you in person. I always did find it easier to talk when you weren't looking. I messed up. I betrayed something real. You gave me everything, and I let myself drift thinking I deserved more, or needed something else, or whatever lie I told myself to sleep at night. But here's the truth. I love you. I love you in ways that scare me, because you've always been better than me, stronger, kinder. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear, on whatever part of me is still worth something, I will never let you feel small, never let you be disrespected in your own home. You are this house. You are the bones of it. I swear it. It's our age. My hands shook as I folded the letter back into the envelope. He never gave it to me. He wrote it, meant it, and then buried it. Literally. But now? It was more than a letter. It was a record. Dated, handwritten, signed. Frank confirmed it when I showed it to him later that evening. It proves emotional acknowledgement of the marriage, he said. It also confirms that the affair and your forgiveness were part of your ongoing relationship. That's important context for the court. It won't win the case, I said. No, but it adds color, and color matters in stories. He handed the letter back to me. That night, I stared at the envelope under my bedside lamp. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Instead, it clarified something. Richard once knew who I was, knew what I meant, and that made his betrayal, now this calculated, cruel erasure, even more sinister. He didn't forget me. He chose to destroy me anyway. And that was something I could use. In court. And in fire. The invitation came on thick, cream-colored cardstock delivered by courier, no less. The envelope was embossed with gold foil and smelled faintly of lavender. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside, the words danced off the page. You are cordially invited to the inaugural Walker Foundation fundraiser, hosted by Sasha Walker, at the historic Walker Estate, Saturday, 6 p.m. Cocktail attire. My fingers curled. It wasn't just an event. It was theater. A stage crafted to show the world that Sasha was now the face of the Walker legacy, not me. She had claimed the house, the name, and now the narrative. I placed the invitation on the counter, walked to the sink, and let the silence wash over me. Frank's voice echoed from our conversation the night before. She's trying to take more than the house, Nora. She's trying to bury your name. I stared at the elegant lettering. So be it. She wanted me to see it? She would see me instead. Saturday evening, I dressed carefully. Navy blue, understated but strong. Mama's pearl earrings, sensible heels. No lipstick, just presence. Frank offered to drive, but I declined. I needed to walk into that place on my own 2 feet. As I pulled up to the estate, the front lawn shimmered with string lights and rented elegance. Jazz music floated through the air. Uniformed valets opened doors like it was the Ritz. I walked past them all. No hesitation. Inside, the house was glowing. Walls I had painted, chandeliers I had chosen, photographs replaced, furniture rearranged. The entire space had been gutted of warmth and filled with curated charm. And there, in the center of it all, was Sasha, draped in crimson silk, laughing beside the mayor's wife, holding court like she'd been born to it. When she saw me, the smile cracked. I walked up slowly, not with defiance but with dignity. Sasha, I said softly, thank you for the invitation. She blinked. You came. Of course, I said. Wouldn't miss the debut of the Walker Foundation. Our Spolder. There was a moment, just a breath, where her composure slipped. Then, the performance resumed. Well, she said, voice honeyed, I suppose you wanted to say goodbye to the house properly. I already said goodbye, I replied. Tonight, I'm just observing how it reacts without me. She turned away, quickly, pulled into another conversation by design. I wandered through the house, greeting familiar faces, answering small talk with small smiles, letting the walls remember me. Then it happened. Near the library, the room I used to call the heart of the house, an older gentleman clinked his glass and said loudly, You know, I always thought this was Nora Walker's home. Surprised not to see her name anywhere tonight. The room went quiet for a moment. A beat. Sasha smiled brittle. We're building a new legacy now. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That question, that name, had already echoed louder than her reply. When I left that night, I didn't cry. I went home, lit a candle, and opened my journal. Day 6. The name. You don't have to fight to stay in a house. Sometimes, all you need is for it to say your name when strangers enter. The call came just after lunch, while I was folding towels in Mama's back room. My phone buzzed once. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Hello? A pause. Then a quiet, guarded voice. Is this Nora Walker? Yes. Who's speaking? Another pause. I don't want to get involved, but I saw your name in the paper, and I thought you should know I used to work with Richard. Years ago. I think he did something similar before, and I think you deserve to know. I stood completely still. Go on. I don't want this traced back to me, but if you can meet, there's more, and I think it might help your case. She gave me a time and a place, a small cafe just outside of town, discreet, old. An hour later, I sat across from a woman in her early 60s, smartly dressed, sharp eyes. Her name was Teresa. I worked with him at Hartley & Co. back in 2008, she said. He was part of a private lending group, and let's just say, some of his deals weren't clean. She sipped her coffee, never breaking eye contact. There was a young woman fresh out of college, sweet, bright. Richard brought her into a deal that didn't sit right, got her to sign off on a document she barely understood. He told her it was routine. It wasn't. What happened? I asked. She lost everything. Her name was tied to a defaulted loan. She ended up in bankruptcy court. He walked away clean. My stomach turned. Did anyone report it? HR buried it. He was too good at making friends in high places. But I've kept a file, copies, notes. Something about the whole thing always bothered me. When I saw your name, I couldn't ignore it. And to Skilled. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were emails, notes, a copy of a document that mirrored the same language used in my forged mortgage. Frank would know how to read it better than I could. But one thing was clear, this wasn't Richard's first time. And it wouldn't be his last unless someone stopped him. Why now? I asked softly. Teresa looked at me for a long time, because I watched him ruin that girl's life, and I stayed quiet. I won't make that mistake again. That's no 80. When I returned home, I called Frank immediately. These aren't just character references, he said, scanning the documents. This shows pattern, intent. It might even be admissible if we can link the language to your documents. This wasn't just about me, I said quietly. He's done this before. Frank nodded. And now, we make sure he doesn't do it again. That night, I lit Mama's candle in the kitchen and opened my journal. Day 7. The pattern. Some men don't fall into darkness. They build it, one lie at a time, and call it legacy. The headline ran above the fold on Sunday's local paper. Widow files fraud claim against prominent businessman. They didn't print my name, but they didn't need to. A photo of the house my house sat just below the headline. The article painted me as grieving, maybe confused. It quoted sources close to the family who said I had been struggling emotionally since Richard's passing. It never said I was wrong, but it never said I was right either. I sat in Mama's kitchen, the paper spread out before me, my tea untouched. My hands were steady, my jaw wasn't. Frank arrived 15 minutes later. I'm sorry, he said, dropping his briefcase. I didn't think it would leak this soon. I don't care that it leaked, I said quietly. I care how they wrote it. He scanned the article, then frowned. They're trying to soften him, preemptively. I was never confused, I said. I was deceived. That's different. Frank nodded. We're going to fix that. He pulled out new files, everything Teresa had given us, now organized and annotated. I filed a supplemental request this morning. We're asking the court to review Richard's past lending activities and to investigate whether Sasha benefited financially from any of them. She will, I said. She always does. Frank hesitated. You're not just fighting for the house anymore. You know that, right? I met his gaze. I'm fighting for every woman who was told to be quiet, to move on, to stop making waves. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was Brenda. She was Richard's second assistant, the one he had fired a year before his death, supposedly for performance issues. I saw the article, she said, and I'm glad someone's finally saying something. He made me sign documents, too. I didn't know what they were. I just signed. She paused. If you need me to speak up, I will. By sunset, 2 more calls came. A real estate broker said Richard had tried to push a quiet sale through 2 years ago under Sasha's name. A former client said he lost thousands in a deal Richard structured for family only. Each story chipped away at the golden shell Richard had built around himself. Each voice made mine louder. That night, I opened my journal. Day 8, when the papers bleed. They said I was confused. But the truth is never blurry when the blood is still fresh on the contract. It was nearly midnight when Leah's email came through. Subject: found this in the archive, might help. Attachment: video, MP4. I opened it on instinct, without expectation. But the moment the screen lit up, I recognized the setting. The 2010 Savannah Legacy Awards, a black tie event held every spring to honor community contributions. Richard stood at a podium, smiling his polished smile, hands gripping the edges of the mahogany stand. His voice echoed through my laptop speakers, a familiar timbre that once made my heart flutter, now tightening it instead. And I wouldn't be standing here tonight if it weren't for the woman who built this life with me. My wife, Nora. She's not just my partner in love, but in every nail, every beam of that house we call home. We built it from scratch. Together. The audience applauded. The camera cut to me in a navy dress, pearls around my neck, clapping politely, unaware that in just a few years, those words would be burned to ash. I paused the video. There it was. His admission. On public record. In front of a room full of witnesses. Frank would love this. But I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the frozen image of myself on the screen. That woman smiling, composed, she still lived in me. Buried, perhaps, bruised, but alive. And more than ever, she deserved to be seen. The next morning, Frank confirmed the video's legal weight. It places you in the house, as co-creator and co-owner, emotionally and practically. It was public, recorded, dated. That matters. He added it to the growing file, labeled it Legacy Statement. Then, for a long moment, he just looked at me. "You're doing it, Nora," he said. "They're running out of stories. But yours? It's getting clearer every day." That scribe did it. That afternoon, I stood before Mama's hallway mirror, the same one I'd looked into on my wedding day, and again on the day I moved back in. I studied my reflection. New lines, new shadows, but also new steel. And I whispered to the mirror what Richard once forgot. I built it, and I'm still standing. The deposition was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Frank and I arrived early, settling into the muted gray room that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. A long table stretched between us and the opposing counsel, who entered a few minutes later, followed by Sasha. She wore sharp navy, high heels that clicked with purpose, and an expression carefully crafted to suggest calm, though I recognized the tightness in her jaw. She didn't look at me. Not once. The court reporter called us to order. The recording device blinked red. Frank began. He moved methodically, laying out timelines, bank records, Richard's notarized lies, the forged signatures, the inconsistent filings. Then he presented the video, Richard's own words. Sasha shifted. When asked about the financial history of the estate, she parried with clipped responses. I wasn't involved in those details. My father handled that. I trusted his decisions. But then Frank asked a simple question. Can you describe the renovations done in 2011? Who hired the contractors? She hesitated. I wasn't around at the time. You were listed as a dependent on his tax filings, Frank replied. And yet you claim co-ownership of the house. How do you reconcile that? Her mouth opened, then closed. Frank pushed gently but firmly. Can you provide receipts for any maintenance you performed? Landscaping, plumbing, structural upkeep? I didn't keep receipts, she snapped. That doesn't mean I didn't contribute. Frank paused, then slid a photo forward of me in 2015, planting new rose bushes by the front gate, paintbrush in hand. The caption on the back, Spring Cleanup, Nora's Favorite Weekend. Sasha looked down. No one spoke. Then the opposing attorney interrupted, trying to redirect. Let's focus on the present claim, not gardening. But the damage was done. In that room between witness statements, financial records, the video, and a woman too proud to admit ignorance, something shifted. Frank whispered later. She thought this would be easy, thought you'd fold. But she wasn't ready to lose. That night, I returned to my journal. Day 9. The room where it changed. She didn't break, but she bent. And that's where justice begins. The night before the trial, my phone buzzed. It was Frank. "They've made an offer," he said. I didn't respond right away. He sighed. $50,000 in emotional damages. They'll drop the ownership claim if you sign a non-disclosure agreement. No mention of the fraud, no public record. I let that sit. Silence has a way of speaking louder than outrage. They also offered a personal apology, Frank added, voice thick with irony. In private. I closed my eyes. Tell them no, I said. Tell them I want it all on record. Frank paused. Then said, simply, good. It's really no that I am duriams. The courthouse steps were already crowded by morning. The story had drawn attention, small-town eyes, community whispers, even 2 local reporters waiting with pens poised. I didn't wear red. I wore gray, strong, quiet, undeniable. Inside, the courtroom buzzed low with tension. Sasha sat flanked by 2 lawyers. Her posture was rigid, but her gaze kept flicking around the room. Looking for what? Control? Exit? Frank opened the case calmly, presenting the forged documents, the altered deed, the misrepresented tax filings. He didn't embellish. He let the facts bleed. The judge listened carefully, nodding at intervals. Then came the witnesses. Brenda, Teresa, Mrs. Rowan. Each told their story different years, different roles, but the same pattern. The same Richard. Finally, Frank presented the video, the one from the fundraiser. Richard's voice echoed through the courtroom. My wife, Nora. We built it from scratch, together. When the lights came back on, there was no sound in the room. And then Frank turned to Sasha. One final question, he said. Did your father ever rescind that statement? Publicly or privately? She blinked. No, not in writing. Then the last statement on record about the ownership of the home still names my client. Silence. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, and for the first time truly I saw Sasha hesitate. Not out of anger, out of fear. That night, I wrote in my journal, Day 10, the last nail. They tried to silence me with politeness, but justice doesn't come dressed for dinner. It comes with mud on its shoes and fire in its bones. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the low hum of the air conditioning. I sat straight-backed, hands folded, eyes steady. The judge looked over his glasses, voice firm but without malice. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Nora Walker. The Walker estate is confirmed under sole ownership of the plaintiff, retroactively and presently. All falsified documents are void. Court costs to be paid by the defendant. It was done. Just like that. No fanfare, no applause. But the silence was different now. Not emptiness. Peace. Sasha stood slowly, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer whispered something, but she only nodded once and walked out the side door. She never filed an appeal. Outside the courthouse, the light had shifted. Softer. Real. Reporters asked questions. Some I answered. Some I left to the wind. But the headline the next day read, Walker Widow Wins Back Legacy. I didn't like the word widow, but I liked the word wins. Weeks passed. The community changed in small ways. The neighbor who once avoided eye contact now brought over a basket of tomatoes. A woman I'd never met before stopped me at the grocery store and whispered, Thank you for standing up, for not folding. And the house? I opened it. Not for Sasha, not for Richard's legacy, but for women like me. Once a month, we gathered in the library, the one she tried to erase, and sat in a circle. We drank tea, and we talked. About grief, about betrayal, about how long it takes to feel like yourself again. We called it the Hearth Circle. Frank still visits, sometimes. Brings donuts. Fixes the porch light. Leah helps run the logistics, sharp as ever, always reminding me that survival is its own kind of inheritance. And me? I sit on the front porch most evenings, the same one where Richard once promised me forever. Now, it's just mine. I don't repaint the scratches on the banister. I leave them. They remind me that history doesn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping. Tonight, the breeze is soft, The wind chimes sing, and as I look out over the lawn, my lawn, I whisper the words I once wrote in my journal. They tried to rewrite me, but the house remembers, and so do I. This story reminds us that silence does not equal weakness. When dignity is stolen and truth is buried, even the quietest woman can rise with a voice that shakes the ground. Nora's journey shows that justice isn't always swift or loud, but it is real, and it belongs to those who refuse to be erased. In reclaiming her home, she reclaimed her worth and reminded us all that legacy isn't built on wealth or power, but on courage, memory, and the refusal to let lies define us.